To many, The Lion King is perhaps one of the greatest films to come out of the Disney franchise, and for good reason. It's a film that not only tells a great story, but a film that utilizes well-known psychoanalytic theories to teach us about the human condition, or in other words, about ourselves. You see, films have the ability to highlight the human truths like no other form of media, and The Lion King is a prime example of that. It's a film that offers us an opportunity to learn about more complex psychoanalytic theories in a digestible and easily understood format. So let's get straight into the film. For those of us who have watched the film, we know the basic premise. A lion cub is born and must face the challenges of life in order to come into his own. A classic coming-of-age plotline. The beginning scene focuses in on one of Freud's central concepts, which he coined his Majesty the Baby, referring to the infantile self-absorption and omnipotence that we all experience as babies. This is evident in the first shots of the film as we're introduced to Simba. We see a beautiful panorama of the African landscape, and all life is fixated on the unveiling of baby Simba. What's key here is how baby Simba is welcomed. He's embraced with all the admiration and appreciation that can be afforded to a future king. This incredible delivery represents the importance of any baby's birth to its parents. Freud elaborated on this concept of His Majesty the Baby by stating that, quote, "The child shall have a better time than his parents. He shall not be subject to the necessities which they have recognized as paramount in life. Illness, death, renunciation of enjoyments, restrictions on his own will shall not touch him. The laws of nature and of society shall be abrogated in his favor. He shall once more really be the center and core of creation, His Majesty the Baby, as we once fancied ourselves." As small children, we think subconsciously of ourselves as the center of the universe. And to our parents, we most definitely are. A parent's attention and care is fixated on the child's needs because it's necessary. The famed psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott described this parental process as the intention from a normal devoted mother. A child cannot see beyond him or herself, as its attention is fixated on the mother and her nurturance. We see this exact natural process play out with baby Simba. Although he is small, to his parents and the Pride Land, he is the center of their universe. Simba's narcissism and omnipotence is further emphasized in his obsession with the elephant's graveyard, a place forbidden to him because of the danger it holds. But the idea of death is foreign and not yet understood by Simba. So instead of connecting the idea of death to the graveyard, he instead is thrilled by the idea of visiting the site and mocking not only his vulnerability, but also parental, or more specifically, his father's authority.
Danger! Danger? Ha! I walk on the wild side. I laugh in the face of danger.
This exact behavior is often seen in children and adolescents, as they walk around the world unaffected by the real risk of danger, and where the anxiety and worrisome of their well-being is left to the parents to deal with.
Hold on, Simba!
One of the major psychoanalytic concepts found in the film is that of the Oedipal rivalry. In analyzing Simba's song of "I just cannot wait to be king," we see Simba revealing his desire to be king and having all the freedom associated with being an adult. On a deeper psychological level, Simba doesn't consciously realize that his father must first die in order for him to become king. And although Mufasa has this talk with Simba about his time coming to an end in order for Simba to take his place, Simba doesn't fully understand the implications attached to his future status. Ultimately, when Mufasa does die, Simba reacts with guilt, believing that it was his fault for his father's death. Rationally, this doesn't make sense, but on a psychological level, it can make sense if we view it as Simba's unconscious wish to overthrow his father. This is a classic example of Freud's Oedipus complex. For those of us not familiar with the myth of Oedipus, it tells of a son who unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. And while in the film, Simba doesn't marry his mother, symbolically, we can replace the Pride Land or the kingdom with his mother. Freud's theory was that as children, we have an innate desire to replace our parent of the same gender. He further explains that a boy would develop a rivalry with his father, believing that he must overthrow his father in order to leave behind his child status and move up in the world. Freud believed that resolving the Oedipus complex was the path to reaching adulthood and succeeding in life and in love. While Freud acknowledged the importance of our capacity to love our mother and redirect that love towards a new partner, he was perhaps more concerned with our fear of father and our unconscious wish to eliminate him, and how this aggression could ultimately affect our ability to produce new, healthy relationships. We can compare Simba to the infamous case study of little Hans. Just as little Hans, a 5-year-old boy who developed a fear of horses due to his inability to resolve his own Oedipus complex, Simba also develops a similar yet different prognosis. Although in Simba's case, his father actually does die, he still entertains the idea beforehand of becoming king or ruler of the Pride Land. Instead of developing a fear of horses like little Hans, Mufasa's death proves psychologically unmanageable for young Simba, who not only feels deeply responsible for his death, but then also forms a fear of anything having to do with the Pride Land, thus leading to his exile. Guilt is a prominent psychological theme throughout the film. Simba leaving behind his motherland is not just a response to a traumatic event, it's also a flee from the guilt he bears from his father's death. Simba ultimately crosses paths with Timon and Pumbaa, and it is then that he decides to leave behind his past and live in the moment, or Hakuna Matata. This new lifestyle requires that Simba relinquish all responsibility, consequences, power, and healthy aggression, as evident by him eating bugs, having his claws filed by Timon, and putting an end to his innate predatory instinct. Essentially, he's regressed to a child state, instead of embracing and taking advantage of his resources, both internally and externally, to achieve personal mastery. The psychoanalyst Melanie Klein coined the term depressive position, in which she believed that as children, we all experience both love and hate for our parents, meaning that the destructive thoughts we hold towards our parents are a natural occurrence in all our relationships. Meaning that the destructive thoughts we hold towards our parents are a natural occurrence in all our relationships. But in order to obtain and maintain healthy relationships, we first must confront the guilt associated with these destructive thoughts and learn to make amends by serving the greater good through any avenue of our choosing. But if we are to become stuck in this childish, immature state, like the one Simba found himself in after leaving the Pride Land, then we cannot reach our greatest potential. In addition, Klein explains that when we become stuck in this depressive position, we fall into a state of feeling mistreated and vulnerable to the fear of exile. As a result, we cope by what she called splitting in denial, or in the case of Simba, fleeing his home in an effort to rid himself of the guilt he feels for his father's death. Simba runs away out of persecution, believing that by staying, he would only bring hatred and disgust onto himself by his peers and family. The scene where the hyenas chase him away is a symbolic representation of the anxiety that plagues him, and one of which he isn't ready to face. As Simba continues to indulge with Timon and Pumbaa in a world free of responsibility and purpose, it isn't until Nala locates his whereabouts and tries to convince him of returning to the Pride Land that he begins to wake up to his true self. Nala, in this moment, represents an inner voice present in all of us, the one available to save us from our childlike states and self-centeredness. Now we detour to Scar and the hyenas. Klein's work on envy serves as our theoretical framework for better understanding these characters. Scar is envious of his brother, but it's not just any sort of envy. It's what Klein called destructive envy, one in which he desires to end all that is good in the world. His justification for this is uttered in his first scene as he complains about how unfair life is.
Life's not fair, is it? You see, I shall never be king.
And even when Scar does finally take rule of the kingdom, it's not to enjoy its pleasures, but rather to see it burn and die. From a Kleininian perspective, the idea is that with destructive envy, you not only take away something that is good, but you also destroy it, so it ceases to exist and no one else or thing can enjoy it. One other prime example is when the hyenas make the joke about how ugly the lions are.
Yeah, you know, if it weren't for those lions, we'd be running the joint.
Yeah, man, I hate lions.
So pushy
And hairy.
and stinky.
And man, are they
Ugly.
The lions, in this case, aren't only resented for their looks and dominance, but also rejected and broken down to nothing. In many ways, we also do this when there's something we want but can't have. We reject that we want it and then undermine its value in an effort to feel entirely disconnected from the object of desire. Eventually, Scar and the hyenas reach a point where the Pride Land has been stripped of all its life and resources, as a result of their destructive envy. If we are to obtain our own riches in life, we must learn to accept and celebrate the riches of others first. Those of us drowning in envy will only create an unescapable inner world made from the pieces that built the envy in the first place. So what are the solutions to these problems of life? What can we learn from Simba in The Lion King and apply it to our own lives? For Simba, this requires leaving behind a life pure of self-indulgence and irresponsibility, and learning to integrate his father's identity into his own in order to create a new identity. But to do so, Simba must come to the realization that his father lives within him, as an internal object, as Klein would say. Simba recognizes that in order to become a man in his own right, he must confront the fears he hides from. This means resolving his sense of responsibility for his father's death and internalizing his father's image within him, so as to serve as a resource from which he can rely on. Klein further elaborates on this process by explaining that once we learn to develop healthy relationships, internally and externally, we can move forward in the world without fear. For Simba, the idea of confronting Scar and the hyenas is no longer intimidating once he's accepted and embraced his new identity. The final face-off between Simba and Scar is a symbolic one, in which Simba must overcome his psychological defenses. As previously mentioned, he must do away with the Hakuna Matata lifestyle and confront the negative internal voice that tells him he's not good enough. For Freud, the superego is our guide towards developing healthy relationships and an ideal self. In The Lion King, we are presented with 3 different versions of the superego. The first comes in the form of the character Zazu. Zazu is the internal voice that is only preoccupied with rules. He doesn't command respect and is always making sure that Simba stays the course, even if that means spoiling all the fun. As a result, Simba has little respect for him and is even amused by the possibility of deceiving him in order to partake in childlike behaviors. Scar is the next version of the superego and can be best described as the ego-dystonic superego. This version is the voice that tells us we're no good and is constantly reminding us of our worthlessness. As a result, this voice creates deep emotional wounds and leads us into developing self-destructive behaviors, which ultimately causes us to believe we don't deserve love, warmth, or growth. Lastly, Mufasa represents the ideal superego, that which can lead us to our greatest potential without damaging us psychologically. He is the embodiment of an ideal that Simba aspires to become. Early on, Mufasa teaches young Simba that with great power comes great responsibility, especially to those around him. Without Mufasa, the ideal superego, Simba cannot hope to become the good king that he so wishes to become. Rafiki knows this, and serves as a guide in helping Simba understand that if he only looks hard enough, he can find Mufasa's spirit within him, and utilize that resource in helping him make his rightful place in the world. In the end, Simba represents all of us. From childhood, where we learn to overcome our own omnipotence and transform it into something more grounded in reality, to the conquering of our Oedipus complex and guilt, and harnessing the good from our parents to form our own adulthood, to learning how to fight and surrender the everyday forces of vicious envy so we can enjoy the fruits of our own labor, to escaping our childlike, hedonistic states in order to reach a more adult and mature place in the world where we can contribute to the lives of others and to our own future.